This special episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Red Sky Morning, the 7th novel in the James Reese Terminalist series. It is coming in hot on May 14th in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Go to officialjackcar.com to pre-order your copy today. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast. My guest today, Marine Corps veteran Johnny Joey Jones. He is the author of Unbroken Bonds of Battle. He lost both legs in Afghanistan. Incredible guy. You can find him now on the Fox News channel. And now, without further ado, Joey Jones. Dude, we've been meaning to do this for a while. Thank you so much for joining me. I sincerely appreciate it. And first, where are you? What's in the background there?
Yeah, I'm in. This is my breakout route. My wife and I back in April made the decision to sell everything we had, and we bought this little cow farm a whole lot closer to where our family is. It's actually in the town that my son goes to school. You know, my son's been with his mom his whole life as far as during the school year. And it's a long story, but my wife and I have been in his life since he was 1 year old. And, you know, you're there for the summer vacations. You're there for every other weekend that you can get, every other school break you can get. You know, I sell days to have him at my house all the time as he's growing up. But going into high school, just what I believe life is all about, being a man, teaching your son to be a man, be there for him, teach him to be his, calloused hands and a soft touch, the whole deal. I really felt like having more time with him was important on the day-to-day basis, on the little things. And so I talked to my wife about it, and we're like, you know what, let's move. And so we moved up here to the town he goes to high school in, which ironically, his mom ended up moving 45 minutes away. So he's about 50% of the time in our house now. And so I say a little cow farm. It's 40 acres and a nice enough house. My wife was happy. But for me, the man cave is this barn I have. So that's where I'm at right now.
Nice. And can you hunt on the property?
Yeah, I've got a river that backs up to the property, and there are deer all around us. But honestly, what I've hunted on this property more than anything is I've got a pond in front of my house, and there have been 20 to 50 geese on that pond every month of the year. So at the beginning of season and at the end of season, we had to alleviate the herd deer a little bit.
Amazing. Well, I love it. But I know I only have you for an hour, but man, I got to tell you, this is an emotional read. I was not expecting that at all. I expect, a couple, part here or there, this is incredible. And it's not all about you. I love how you've done it with these stories of people that or you met after or during or through someone else, but then have your commentary as well. But the intro, you're an amazing writer. The intro it's so good, but very emotional read. I think every American needs to read this. But I want to ask you about your dad and growing up in that wisdom. I mean, you start off with him in this book, and that wisdom that he passed on to you. So obviously very influential in your life. So tell me about your dad.
Yeah, no, when we wrote the book, I say we because I worked with another writer, and he interviewed each of the people in there based on me outlining what I felt like their story was. But they were so close to me, I was really afraid that if I interviewed them, I wouldn't get their story. I'd get their story in relation to me. And so I worked with this guy, Gary Brozak, who's a really great writer, and he interviewed them and transcribed their thoughts and helped me organize them. And like you said, the stuff that's in my voice, I wrote. And so when it came time for me to do my part of the writing, there were these themes that came to be that I had no idea were there. I didn't know that's what was on my heart. I didn't know that's where I wanted to go. But I read all of their chapters, and then I'd go through and read each chapter and kind of write down notes. And I kind of did this process I made up on my own. And I learned that the themes were, in no particular order, a father-son relationship, or in some cases, lack thereof, football, and hunting. And a theme in the sense of not only is it something that most of the guys in the book and the one female and I have in common, but more so the dynamic that showed through that not only do we have these things in common, but they were vitally important to becoming the men that we became and making the choices that we made. When you read the book, you read like Danny Ridgway wouldn't be a Marine if he hadn't joined a hunting club. And Greg Rabluski wouldn't be a Marine if he hadn't missed his father figure and was looking for that. And Amos Benjamin wouldn't be in our lives if it weren't for the struggles he had and having his older brother fill that role of father and losing his dad the way he did. So I didn't really process all of that. I just read and enjoyed and then sat down and said, okay, what do I have to say? And, from the talks I give when I'm in front of a crowd to obviously this book, I usually don't make it a couple minutes without mentioning my dad. And I think the reason why he's been so influential in my life in death, even more so than in life, I lost him back in 2019. And I was there for it. You put guys on a bird and you don't think much about it in the minute until later on. But when you do CPR on your dad, man, it's a different world. And so for my dad, he was 5'8". He had social anxiety. He was very disciplined. He's pretty much the opposite of me in every way you think of. I'm this guy that's outgoing. I love to be in a crowd if it's my crowd. I was 6'1" when I had legs. I'm about 6 foot now. And both of his brothers were well over 6 foot tall. His dad was over 6 foot tall. He was literally the runt of the family, but he was the oldest brother. He was the one that everybody went to when they needed help. And he was the kind of man that, that saying, jack of all trades, master of none. He knew how to do everything and he knew how to do it right. And that was important to him. It wasn't worth doing if you didn't want to do it right. So that type of internal discipline, I kind of refer to him almost as like a Byronic hero. He needed to suffer some to be happy with where his place was. Like he felt like his place in life was to provide and protect, and there needed to be a little bit of pain and agony in that. Some of it self-imposed and some of it due to the nature of the fact he was a brick and block mason. But he enjoyed to be by himself and to feel like he gave something up for those around him. And I think in that way, he definitely left an impact on me.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can tell by the way that like you write about him in here. It was really cool to read that, and also to read about how he could walk into a room and do the math on just the building.
Yeah.
Just was so good at that sort of thing. Because it stood out to me because it's a skill that I do not possess. But when he was taking for those rides in the truck, it was really cool. You said he took you in his truck to get you to sleep as a kid, and then later in life pass on lessons. Like you got in that truck and you went on these backcountry roads, and he would pass along this wisdom to you. When you think about those rides, like, is there one that stands out to you as something he passed along?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We did it a lot. We called it loafering. If you're from the South, it's just one of those words that makes no sense, but it does. And the reason why is, he'd go out and we were going to go to one person's house. The next thing you know, you're going to somebody else's house, and they're 10 miles in between. And, 5 hours into it, you visited 10 people and driven 100 miles. And he, as a brick and block mason, what he liked about it was every job site was somewhere new. So every week he went to a new place of work, and he never wanted to go there and back the same way. So he knew the roads better than firemen do. Like you could drop him off on Highway 225 anywhere for 100 miles, and he'd know exactly where he was at. And so we'd go on these rides, but part of it for him was just kind of, that was his opportunity, I think, to connect with me and talk. And he had his eyes forward, his hands on the steering wheel, and he could just talk to this person in the seat. So the one that sticks out probably the most is right after high school, my long-term girlfriend, who's now my wife. So I figured it out, but she broke up with me. And, as a guy, your heart gets broken. You're like, okay, well, I can just make this one change and we should be able to get back together again. This is no big deal, right? Like, you think I'm selfish. I just won't be selfish, and we'll fix this and move on. And, with women, it just doesn't work that way. It took me 10 years to get her back, but my dad saw that I was kind of moping around, and this was my first time really getting my heart broke. And, he said, you know what? We were working up, I forgot where it was at, and I found this cave. Why don't we take this rope and go check this cave out? So my buddy Keith was with me, and he's a smaller guy than me. And next thing you know, we're driving for an hour and a half to get to some cave he knew about, probably knew about it for the last 30 years, but he made it sound like he just saw it the other day. And long story short, we get there, and I'm too big to go down in the hole. So we tie a rope that we use on scaffolding on the brick job around my buddy Keith's waist and lower him down in there. And he's down in there. He's finding stuff people painted on the walls. It gets real big and cavernous down in there because we're up in the mountains. And but the whole drive out there and drive back, he just kind of, really what he did was let me talk. And then he'd have a little anecdote to say here or there. But I think the point of it was, more than anything, the way he would frame things, he kind of wanted me to know, hey, getting your heart broke is a good thing, because that means that you've known what the relationship is, and you've been in something like that. And he was always an optimist. He's like, just give her some time, But he'd say stuff like, one of his favorite sayings was, don't complain about the rain, complain about its timing. And really what he means by that is things happen to you in life. Sometimes they're a blessing. They just don't feel like it in the moment. And that was very much how I felt about her breaking up with me. I'd been talking to a Marine Corps recruiter. I actually went to her house and said, look, I'm not joining the Marine Corps because of you, but you're the only reason I would stay. And she looked at me and smiled and said, well, have a good time in boot camp. And so, I look back and I think they were all in on it. They all knew that I needed to get out of town and go grow up a little bit. And he was excited to see me do that.
Oh man. Yeah. It really comes across in the book. What year did you join the Marine Corps? Why did you choose the Corps rather than another service?
Well, listen, I know who I'm talking to, but just hear me out on this. This is, this was my experience in the moment. I love to tell this story. If you'll humor me, it's a great story because I think a lot of people can relate. I grew up in a small town, Dalton, Georgia. I graduated high school in 2005. So I had guys that I played football with that had already joined and gone to war and come back. But the war was still pretty early looking back now. And I remember thinking, man, I better hurry up and get in there. I'm going to miss this thing. And, here we are looking back going, I could have become a doctor and still fought in this war. And so maybe I got a little ahead of myself. My two best friends talked me into joining. And the reason I chose the Marine Corps more than anything, and I've only recently really put thought into this, I went, the Army recruiter would come and he would promise college. And the Air Force recruiter would come and he would promise an occupation, a 9-to-5 that you could have after the Air Force. The Navy recruiter would come and he would promise travel, see the world, sell the world. And then the Marine Corps recruiter would come and he'd say, you know what? I don't think you have what it takes. You're welcome to try, and it was that demeanor and that idea of, well, don't tell me I can't do it. Don't tell me that, and that idea that it would grow me up and turn me into something better. I played football and laid brick and block, but I was still, a teenager and I had a lot of growing up to do. And my dad was big on respect. He was the kind of guy that he acted like he had been in the military, just the way he carried himself. And I don't know where it came from other than his two granddads, but it was an easy transition for me, but I didn't have it all before I got there just because my dad acted that way. I needed somebody else to tell me that's the way you act, to appreciate it in my dad. And so the Marine Corps recruiter just kind of had that air about him. He is a muscular guy. He was kind of big and he really was intimidating. And he made me feel like he was doing me a favor to sign on that dotted line. And as much as, we make fun of that now, I'm glad it's the way it was.
Oh, man, that is awesome. So does that mean that you were like in 8th grade on 9/11?
9th grade. I graduated at 17.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I was in 9th grade. And I remember watching the first tower fall in weight training. They had a TV on there and it was never on because they wanted us to work out. And the coach came in, turned the TV on. And I was weight training for football. And that evening we were out on the football field, or later that week, I can't remember. And our coach, we were all laying on our back stressing. And the coach kind of took a minute and said, look up, guys, see what you don't see. And there were no planes in the sky. And I can't remember if it was that day or later. It was early on. And he said, what happened today may not register now, but it's changing the world and it's going to change your life too. And I really appreciate it. He was a Marine Corps veteran and he knew what was coming. And he knew a bunch of us out there on that football field were going to be wearing a uniform.
Wow. And then why EOD? Where along the lines did you find out about EOD? Did you know about it before or once you got in?
No.
What was the path into EOD?
Man, I say this all the time. My family were moonshiners. If they were doing public service, it was in an orange jumpsuit because they got caught doing what they weren't supposed to do. I didn't have a big military influence. One of my best friends, his dad had served in Desert Storm and was also a teacher and a coach. And so I was around him, but it was still somebody else's dad. It wasn't anybody in my family. And so I joined the Marine Corps without knowing anything about it other than like Full Metal Jacket. And when you watch Full Metal Jacket, beyond being just an amazing piece of cinema, it is also kind of multiple movies in one. But by the time you get to, the scenes where they're deployed, you realize that Private Joker is combat journalist, right? He's not an infantryman, but you see these scenes where he's fighting for his life. And so without any other version of the military in front of me, I'm like, okay, well, we're all going to live in a squad bay and carry a rifle. And some of us are smart enough to learn other jobs. That's kind of what I thought it was going to be. So the recruiter got me in on a communications electronics contract. So I was fixing radios. And evidently I had the intelligence for it, but I did not have the interest in being in this sterile environment, grounded to a table, soldering. So I started raising my hand for everything the minute I got to my first duty station, which was in Hawaii. So I went on USS Rushmore and flipped pancakes for 3 months for RIMPAC. I became a range coach. I ended up guarding nuke subs at Pearl Harbor when they changed the nuclear rods out. If there was a detail, I volunteered for it for 2 reasons. I wanted to see what else was out there, and I wanted to be so bad at working on radios, they let me go do something else. And so I was able, in a very roundabout way, and the Marine Corps prides itself on having the least amount of people and the most amount of jobs. So you can laterally move and be built all over the place back at this time anyway. And so I ended up being mounted security for convoys in Iraq in 2007. And my team got picked to be the EOD security. So rather than a convoy, we did EOD escort. And I had some experience with EOD and Pearl Harbor. They would kind of war game us with fake IEDs. And I'd already kind of started a package because I'd learned about it, but I didn't know much about it. I just wanted to do something different. But then doing the security for them in Iraq in 2007 and 2008, I ended up putting that package in, interviewing with that team, and doing on-the-job training with that team for, I think, 6 of 10 months I was there. And I picked it. And the Marine Corps, you have to. You can't come in off the street on a contract for EOD simply because there aren't a lot of Marines, so there isn't a huge EOD field. And they spend a lot of money. They give the Navy a lot of money to train you, and they don't want to send you unless they know you're going to do it. So you have to be an E5 to do EOD in the Marine Corps.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if you can go in the Navy on an EOD contract. I think you can. I think there's some sort of but it's kind of like probably the SEAL route and rescue swimmer, where they give you the opportunity to try out. It like guarantees you a tryout more than anything else. So it really doesn't make a difference at all. Maybe they can tack a couple of years on or something. Kind of one of
I'll tell you, the Navy's smart. So what the Navy did back then, everything's different now. It's hard to believe, but I've been out of the Marine Corps for more than 10 years. I've been out of the EOD field for that long. But back when I was in school and really working in the field, what they would do, the Navy, I don't remember if on the enlisted side, if they had lower rank open contracts. I think all of the other 3 services bring in commissioned officers in which you can come in young. The Marine Corps didn't do any commissioned officers in their EOD field either. It was all warrant officer and laterally LDOs. And so what the Navy did do that I thought was awesome is, and this is a little bit of a derogatory term, but we didn't know it as that. But they had what they called buds that would come because they'd already been through dive school, and they had that training, and they ended up leaving buds for reasons that weren't bad character. And so they brought them over to the EOD community, and they did really well there. They'd already had all the prerequisites to work in special warfare, and they brought them over to EOD. So a lot of the guys came from that.
No kidding. So is it the same school? Did you go to Navy EOD school for the Marine Corps? Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a Navy ran school on an Air Force piece of property. 51% of the students are Army, and a disproportionate amount of the instructors are Marines. And it's just that's the culture, and it works really well.
No kidding. Yeah, one of my dearest friends is a former Navy EOD guy, and I think I can say his name. I put him in the back of the book. He's never said I shouldn't. So Jeff Rotherham, amazing guy. And I always check what I put EOD-wise in the novels. I send it to him and ask him to kind of fix it up if I made anything atrocious mistake, but also take like one ingredient out or one type of thing out, just so some kid doesn't blow themselves up in the basement type of a deal. But my whole intent that is always so that if an EOD guy reads it and gets to one of these places where I'm building an ID or having the guy, whatever it is, that they say, oh, he put in the work. He put in the work to try to get this right. And, oh, look what he left out. I see what he did here. So that's my goal always with the building IEDs or talking about EOD. And this last one, I put in a Marine Corps EOD guy who helped save the day in this last book. That's awesome. And how was that school for you? Did you have any issues? Is there high attrition there? I mean, it seems like a stressful thing to go do. I mean, I've been out with EOD guys, with us to just run through the houses with us and are attached the whole thing that never have to do the job. And then I've been out stopping the convoy and having the EOD guys walk up to something. And more often than not, they would just pick it up and like throw it in the back of the Humvee and they're off we would go, or blow it up, blow it in place or whatever. But oh my gosh, so much respect for anybody that chooses to do that and then does it downrange. It's just incredible.
It was interesting. When I came in, the movie Hurt Locker had just come out, and that's not very accepted in the community for a lot of obvious reasons.
Oh my gosh.
And there's this culture in EOD. It's kind of across the board. I can primarily speak to Marine and Navy because that's where I spent most of my time. But we really strive to be completely silent professionals. The idea is if you want any of the credit, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're going to get somebody hurt. And, with guns or bombs, it's the same thing. Like that mentality has to be there. What you do after you leave is different. But while you're in, you want to be as anonymous and part of this. So we don't give challenge coins. We'll give an EOD badge. We don't even make challenge coins most of the time. And it's that idea of, your rank and file and what you do is important, but you don't do it for the credit. So when, Hurt Locker came out, there was some of that about, I don't even know his name, the guy that kind of was the inspiration for it. But I loved it. Once I learned the job for two reasons, just like you said. Number one, you can't learn anything about the job watching the movie. Like you can't, because nothing in the movie is very accurate. Some things are egregiously inaccurate. But what it does do is it translates the intensity of the job. And I think a lot of EOD techs stop shy of really thinking through this. The most intense moment working an ID, everything's quiet and still. There's not noise. There's not commotion. There are a bunch of Marines providing security, hoping nothing goes wrong, making sure no one messes with you while you do your job. You can just about hear your sweat leave your brow and drop on the ground as you're deciding what to do. Now, you're very confident. It's not like in the movies where it's like red wire or blue wire. When you see the problem, is what we call it, the IED, you know what actions you're going to take. You're just methodically doing it. And so you can't translate that intensity into cinema without other things for the audience to feel it. So when people walk away from Hurt Locker, I think they have a very real and accurate feeling of what that job is like, the intense moments. There isn't a moment really where you're in a bomb suit and you pull a pistol on somebody, but that intense moment, that standoff that the audience can actually digest and understand in that scene is what I feel leaning over an IED that I've seen 100 times, hoping this isn't the one that's booby trapped. And so I think to get that across to people and to go back to your original question of kind of what was it like in that school and kind of why do it almost, it's just kind of cross-section of arrogance and ignorance and the best version of both. You are just arrogant enough to buy into the idea that if you've done everything you're supposed to do, you're going to win. And you're just ignorant enough to the fact that the truth being, if the enemy does everything right, it's hard for you to win. And so I use those two words to kind of capture people's attention, but I'm not calling it arrogant or ignorant. It's the best version of those two ideas, because you really have to be able to turn off in the back of your mind that survival instinct that says, don't do this, it will kill you. And you do it not because you want to be a cowboy or you want credit. You do it because somebody has to. I mean, somebody has to. That's the only way to get down this road, to get across this bridge, to win this war, to take these people on. And we do breed a culture of learn everything inside and out, share information, take data. I mean, every time I worked in IED, even in the worst conditions, I've got back then, a little digital camera. I'm taking cardinal directions, taking pictures, writing down notes. So at some point, either tomorrow or next month, I write a report and share that information with the other EOD teams. And they do a great job of creating a culture in the school, because they can't kill you, right? They can't just blow you up for making a mistake. That's more of a Russian tactic. And so they can't just let you get blown up. So you're working on dummy ordnance, but they have to create that anxiety to see how you're going to deal with it. So the way they structure the school, it's a train running on a track, right? Like you're constantly moving. Every year there are 10 or 12 sections, and no one section is more than about a week. Most sections are less than a week. You test about 3 times in each section. So there are days where you learn about this new section this morning, you're testing this afternoon, or you moved into it this afternoon, you're testing tomorrow morning. You got to make an 86 or better on the test to pass. I'm sorry, an 85 or better on the test to pass. So if you make an 84, you fail. Well, a 16-point hit is something that would kill you. An 8-point hit is something that might kill you. A 4-point hit is something that could kill you. And so they create this anxiety, because if you fail a test, you have to retake it right away. If you fail it twice, you're technically out of school. You got to go in front of a board and talk them into letting you back in which case you've lost your class, because that train kept moving. And a couple of days later, you got to go back to the beginning of the next one coming through. So they create this academic intensity. And for a school that's probably 50% laterally moving into it, that means half your students know they've got to go back to being a cook or whatever it was they wanted to leave. So they really want to be there. They really want to get through this school. And so you create that anxiety, the stress, but in a positive way of, hey, it's not just perform, it's make 100 every time. And our slogan our motto up until, honestly, we had so many guys get killed, was initial success or total failure. Total failure not meaning you die. Total failure meaning you didn't protect those around you. You either take care of this bomb or it blows up. We changed it because it added a negative connotation to the sacrifice a lot of guys made. Because back to the original statement, if the enemy does everything right, you just may not be able to win today.
So intense. The enemy's always adapting. You're always trying to adapt to the enemy. You're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses, capitalizing on momentum, all those different things. But from 2001 onward, it seems like the IED threat was the thing that was constantly evolving faster than almost anything else on the enemy side. And we were always trying to scramble to catch up, figure out different countermeasures, whatever. And then they would adapt back and forth. So really, yeah, tactics and other weaponry and those sorts of things, yes. But that IED threat is the one that stands out to me as the one that was constantly evolving at a pace that I can't even describe. What was it called? The Asymmetric Warfare Group, or some sort of an IED working group back in the day. And so
one of them started with a J. JDOPS or something like that. There was a couple of different ones. Yeah.
But they did a really good job. I remember having to go in and you see everything laid out. I remember it was either a green zone or BIAP or somewhere, but all the different new technologies that the enemy was using, how they were adapting to our countermeasures and back and forth, and then giving reports like from how me and my guys saw things to pass along or whatever, just to try to build that knowledge base and that foundation for guys already in theater and then guys that were coming into theater doing your job. So, man, nothing but the most respect in the world for everybody that does that EOD job. It's incredible. So first deployment then, what is it like working your first real problem when it's not a schoolhouse?
Yeah, it was interesting. I get into this a little bit when I give talks. I talked about it a little bit in Pete Hegseth's book called Modern Warriors in my chapter, but in the Marine Corps EOD field, you're all in this very tight array of rank, right? E5, E6, E7. Our E8s and E9s are on the master gunnery sergeant side. We don't allow any first sergeants or sergeant majors. And the reason why is those two ranks can come from other units. To be an EOD, you have to wear the badge, the way it's structured now. It could change one day. If we were as big as the Navy, it would be different. But because we're so small, we can breed our own officers and still function. And so all of our senior enlisted are master gunnery sergeants that still can do the job. And many of them were still taking bombs apart because, quite frankly, we didn't have enough of us for how many were getting blown up. And then also all of our officers are either warrant officers or warrant officers that became limited duty officers. And for those that don't know, that's essentially a warrant officer is an enlisted person who passes over to the officer side in a very limited way inside the job field and inside the service. You can trade those warrant officer bars in for the insignia of a captain, major, or lieutenant colonel. You get a little bit more responsibility, but you're still limited, unlike a fully commissioned officer. The reason why I point that out is the dynamic between a teammate and a team leader. Because to take one step back, Afghanistan was so much more workload heavy than Iraq. In Iraq, we could take 2-3-man teams in a truck, what we call a JERV or an MRAP, and they could span everything around Al-Assad, which is really big. They could get on a road, drive there, work the IED, come back, go out in like a fireman response kind of way. When we got to Afghanistan and the Helmand province, you're in these poppy fields and you're 2 or 3 villages back from a main road. And you're walking through these poppy fields across these bridges. The truck goes out the window. The robot goes out the window. We choose not to do the bomb suit for technical reasons to begin with. So now you're on patrol with the grunts when they're out doing their job. If it's a raid or just a patrol or an intelligence or reconnaissance, whatever, you're with them because it's not just when they happen to come across one, but now you've got intelligence and you're going after and you know what's going to be there, probably will. So you're gearing up and you're going out with them every time. So we went from a 3-man team to a 2-man team because we had to have a team of EOD techs in every grunt company in that area of operation. So we went from 6 EOD techs covering this area to 30 EOD techs covering this area. Same area, same amount of Marines there. And so you have a team leader in yourself I was a sergeant. My team leader was a staff sergeant. There were some teams where you had 2 staff sergeants, some teams where you had 2 sergeants, some teams where you had 2 E8s that worked together, because your rank was nowhere near as important as your seniority and time and experience. And so I had a team leader that had a couple of deployments under his belt. And I was looked at among the young guys as at least a guy who had been on an LJT deployment and was familiar with the job of how it's done. I haven't done it, but I've sat past their seat and watched it done. So I was given a little bit more responsibility early on. And quite frankly, the way things played out in Afghanistan, the idea would be, in the traditional sense, you deploy as the third man on the team and you run the robot and watch. Then you deploy as the second man on the team. You get out of the truck and you help the guy walking down range be his eyes and ears. Then you deploy on your third deployment as the team leader, and you're the only one walking down, taking the bomb apart. It didn't work like that in Afghanistan. If you find it, you work it, because if he's 10 feet over there, I've got an IED here, the chances of him having one at his feet, one in between us, it wasn't worth the risk. You better have the skill set and have done the training and read the reports, and at least can talk to your team leader and make good decisions. So I worked my first IED the first day I was at my FOB. So I was about 6 days in Afghanistan when I worked my first IED. And that was exhilarating. I was addicted like that. And I hate to say it that way. That's not the character I want to put out there, but it's the truth. Like, I was young. I'd spent a couple of years of my life finding my way into this job field. I'd seen it done on half a deployment. I'd gone through the school. I'd excelled among my peers. I wanted to be there and be taking apart bombs. That's what I wanted to do. And I hadn't yet lost that good friend. And I hadn't yet seen that good buddy. I hadn't yet had my world rocked. Now, shortly after this, I did, and it puts everything into perspective. But from the first IED to the one that took my legs, I enjoyed the job. I mean, it's an adrenaline rush. It's hard to find. There are a lot of EOD techs that are skydivers and motorcycle riders because they're looking for that, And I guess for me, it's live television talking about things that people like to get mad about. But you once you do it, you need it,
Yeah, that might be the scariest of all. Man, I'm getting anxious just hearing you talk about it. But every time those guys went and did their job, I mean, I'm feeling it right now. Like, I'm thinking about some of those things and being so nervous for them, which is why I always liked when we just blew them up or shot them with a 50 or like did something like that seemed much more sensible than walking to one. Man, that is just wild. So after you did get your world rocked and lost that friend, whether they were with you or it was somewhere else in theater or wherever else, what was it like to then walk up on your next one?
Yeah. So what happened was, it was interesting. So we went for a while before. It was really calm when we got there. They were harvesting the poppy, so they weren't fighting as hard. And we really didn't expect a tough deployment. To put things in a broader geopolitical spectrum, this was the summer of 2010. And coming into the midterms, or coming into the election season at the end of that year, President Obama's administration had postured, hey, we're pulling out of Afghanistan. And so from the Pentagon down, the idea was they're going to lay in wait. They're going to let us get out of there before they really, there's no reason for them to attack us because we're pulling out. And it could be because of the pundit reaction. It could be for reasons I don't know. We ended up with the opposite. I think they thought they could push us out even quicker, get us away from the areas most important to them, like the agricultural area where they harvested poppy. Our operations was trying to remove poppy and supplant it with wheat to try to give them a more legitimate crop. It's like tell a drug dealer to go sell bread, And I mean, I guess with the current war, wheat is a little bit higher value commodity than I realized, but still it was interesting to try to get villagers to not grow poppy when they've done it for 1,000 years. And so they really fought harder. We didn't know that, but it took a month or two for that to happen. So we got there early. We got there in March, and I want to say it was May before one of our guys was hit. One of the guys in my platoon. So it's weird too, because you work up and you live every day with a platoon of 30, but then when you get to Afghanistan, you're broken up into 2-man teams. So your platoon's scattered all over. You're communicating with them via VSAT with reports. And so In the same day, two of our guys, a guy named Dave Line lost his legs and a guy named Adam Perkins lost his life. Two different incidents, two different places. And it was weird. They were in places, counties away from me, but from that day on, it was gangbusters everywhere. They decided to go to work, the Taliban. And so I remember Dave Line was a guy I knew pretty well. I didn't know Perkins as much. And I remember hearing that, and I was like, if he can get anybody can. I had a lot of respect for him. He seemed to really know the job. He had just been on deployment. And back then, I was real big into running. Not so much now for obvious reasons, but I laced up the tennis shoes I had with me, and my EOD tent was right next to the helicopter pad. And I just remember going out there and running around the helicopter pad till my feet bled. And I think in the back of my mind, without making it a fully conscious thought, it was like, hey, I may never be able to do this again. That is the consequence of this job. If you don't lie, if you get hit, you don't die, you're probably not taking both feet home with you. And so that was my visceral initial reaction, was just to go out there and run. And I was processing it too. I don't think it changed how I approached the job because I was confident. And you have to be. Not cocky, but you have to be confident. Hey, I did this and I did that. I checked this box. I looked for remote control. I looked for any type of command wire. I looked for the right things before I approached this ordinance. I've got a jammer running or this IED that should jam any type of remote control. I've done a circle to look for command wire. I know that when I go down there, the only thing that can set this off is me, and I'm going to do everything right to not let that happen. But it does put it in perspective. It goes from a almost, for me early on, a sense of joy. Like, hey, I went down and did it, and that's awesome, to a sense of relief. Hey, I'm back. We got the IED done. Let's get ready for the next one.
Yeah, that relief one is something that really resonates with me. This special episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Red Sky Morning, the 7th novel in the James Reese Terminalist series. It is coming in hot on May 14th in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Go to officialjackcar.com to pre-order your copy today. What was the day like when you were wounded?
Yeah, that's an important one, right? So it was August 6th, 2010. Helmand, it's kind of hard. Like in Iraq, and I think it was because it was the first war in a sense. It wasn't the first, but it was the first one to blow up in the headlines from 2003 to 2007, 8. That was Fallujah and Ramadi and Haditha and Hit, and all these cities that either in culture or at least in the Marine Corps you really knew about. They were, huge cities that we went into and learned so much from. In Afghanistan, it was more of a slow, steady burn, but there were little moments that were incredibly impactful that we learned so much from. It changed our tactics. And one of them was the city of Marjan. So when we took Marjan, we took it slowly and we learned a lot from it. But before we took it, or before we held it, we had Nowzad. Before Nowzad was, I can't remember the other city. So we learned each time we did these cities. So even though it wasn't, we lost 50 guys, we lost a guy in a way that really sucked. And we took that and everybody knew about it. We implemented on the next one. So I believe this was before we took Marja, they wanted to take a smaller town called Safar Bazaar and implement a tactic they wanted to use, which was taking Mikliks, which are linear explosives that are stretched out by a rocket, putting them on the back of a flatbed 7-ton and shooting the rocket over the cab of the 7-ton down a street and setting it off. And the engineers thought they could sympathetically detonate the IEDs in the street by doing this. Well, the opposite happened. It became a huge problem. We lobbied against it, but when there are a few hundred of us and they've got colonels that are engineers, it's hard to go in and really make that argument. So what happened was all these IEDs, the construct of an IED in Afghanistan is a loop circuit, like the dollar store flashlights you would take apart. You have a battery source, you have a switch that disconnects the circuit. Then you have your main charge is initiated by a blasting cap, which is your light bulb in that analogy. That's simple. It's a closed loop circuit. There's one switch. Arming it is a little bit risky. So what they would do is they would put the main charge and the pressure plate right on top of it in the path that they wanted you to step on it. Pressure plate being you'd step on it and set it off. But they would take 8 or 10 D-cell batteries, solder them together and run it 30, 40 yards away and plant that somewhere so that when they came up, they'd put the IED in the ground. But when they came up to put the power source to it, if something went wrong and it was short-circuited, they wouldn't blow themselves up putting power to it. That's the last thing they would do. Well, the other effect, talking about that chess game, is they found a way to make the main charge and the pressure switch non-metallic. So the only thing that our metal detectors, which was our main use, our main tool to detect, the only thing that was metallic were the power sources. They would be ran under walls. They'd be ran at the base of trees, places we wouldn't automatically think to sweep or couldn't sweep because they were dug under a wall. And so it made it very difficult. Our detection method was mostly human intelligence. When we got ready to go into Safar Bazaar, we had to tell the town we were coming. And it was far enough away from Poppy that its primary purpose was trading. And we knew because of that, the IED components were coming in and out of there from all over that region. So we had identified one building that we knew. We thought it was a hotel from that old Falcon view. I mean, if they knew the drone footage back then is not what you see now, And so we identified it as a hotel because vehicles that we were tracking would pull in, stay for a day and leave. When we got there, we realized it's a storage facility. And it was literally, this building, this part is full of main charges, switches, pressure plates, initiators. And so we started clearing the streets first. And because we told them we were coming, they just took all those IED components and made the town into a minefield. We found 207 functional IEDs in 2 square kilometers with 6 EOD techs, 3 two-man teams. So to fast forward here a little bit, when they took these rockets and they shot them down these roads and they tried to sympathetically blow up these bombs, explosives don't work that way. That didn't blow up any of the main charges. What it did do was it severed those wires. So now you have these exposed wires. You don't know if that wire is going to a switch, which means it's still energized. And if you connect them, it blows you up. Or if that wire was going to a battery, which means that keep them away from each other and there's no power to it. So you're crawling around on your hands and knees with pieces of black tape, trying to tape these wires to insulate them so you can go back and prosecute, pull them with a hook and line or sweep them with a metal detector, find out what component you have that's been severed in front of you and where the main charge is and the power source. This is very stressful. For 5 days, we worked really hard. My teammate and I worked almost 30 IEDs in those 5.5 days. The other 2 teams worked about 20 between them. We just had the lion's share of the work because of where we were. And on the morning of the 6th morning, this Marine engineer, a reservist from Tennessee named Daniel Greer, he was a full-time fireman, joined the Marine Corps Reserves because he wasn't doing enough to serve his country. He woke me up. He said, Sergeant Jones, we found something we want you to take a look at. So my teammate and I literally walked across the street from where we were berthing. It was this storage facility, and they had found some conventional ordnance that they had recovered off the battlefield. So they really needed us to look at it. Long story short, my teammate moved it. Realized we probably shouldn't. It was a Lu 2, this big candle in the sky. And I learned in school that you don't move them because they could turn into a candle on their shoulder. And so he walked away, and I went up there to look at it because I wanted to see if it was what we call a hung striker, if it could still turn into a fireball. And when I stepped away from it with my right foot, I stepped on an IED. And kind of the irony in this whole situation is no matter how many times you swept an area, you don't know that you got it clear. I mean, and we had lost a corpsman that was the 11th man in a 12-man patrol, meaning 10 people probably stepped on that IED before he did. Just happens that way sometimes. So we had cleared that area. Multiple Marines have been there. I just stepped in just the right spot. The worst part about it was obviously it took my legs, almost took my arm, punctured a lung, but it took Daniel Greer's life. He was providing security for me while I did my job. I got him out of the blast radius, but I hadn't gotten him out of the frag radius, which sometimes is a concession you make. And a piece of that wall flew through the air in front of me and hit him under the Kevlar and just the right spot to take his brain activity away, traumatic brain injury. Yeah.
Yeah, reading about that part with his widow going to Germany in the book. I mean, I know we don't have time to go through. I was going to ask you about a bunch of the different stories in here, but I'm almost glad that we don't, because it is so emotional to read. I know I get emotional just asking you about them and hearing you talk about them. What's the next thing do you remember the blast and being there, or what do you remember next after the blast?
Yeah. You need to school me up, because I'm writing a second book and I don't know how to promote a book. Like they wanted me to write a book about me, and you saw what I produced. And it's not some fake humility. Like, I just don't know how to do that. And so, but I believe in this book, and one of the last chapters in the book is Daniel Greer's widow. And so I tell that story through her lens, not mine. It's not about what happened to me. It's about what happened to her. She's a real victim that day, in my opinion. And so what happened next is the guys got me off the battlefield. And I think I tell this story in the book, but they took Daniel off the battlefield first. And, triage is you take the worst first, unless the worst is so bad, there's nothing you can do. And so when they took Daniel Greer first, I was laying on my back, and I could see him in front of me. His oriented completely different, because I'd been flying through the air. But he had all his limbs. He wasn't bleeding. He was kind of on his belly looking back to me like he was knocked out. And when they took him off the battlefield, I'm like, well, he's not dead and he's not missing limbs. Like, does that mean I'm so bad that there's just nothing they can do for me? I tried to put a tourniquet on. My left arm was around behind me, so I couldn't see it. My legs were gone. I was laying on my back. When I reached up with my right arm to grab a tourniquet off my shoulder, it was severed. All but the muscle in the back, it was split. And so I had no control over the hand. And so I couldn't do a tourniquet. And so finally a Marine got to me. And as he's working on me, they take Daniel Greer off. I thought, well, maybe like this is it. So I looked at him and I said, hey, I wasn't thinking Daniel wasn't going to make it. I was thinking I wasn't going to make it. That's why they took him first. I said, hey, man, say the Lord's Prayer with me. So we kind of do our Father who art in heaven. And then we both kind of paused. And almost simultaneously, we kind of gave it with liberty and justice for all, and kind of had a chuckle because we didn't know the Lord's Prayer. So sometimes it's intent, not execution, But finally, some Marines got to me. They got some tourniquets on me, hit me with the morphine about 10 minutes into it. My eyes swelled shut. And the commander of the unit was with me, and he later told me that I just kept saying, hey, I'm sorry I screwed up. Sorry I let you down. And so I think I was kind of panicking. I was going into shock, and I was really starting to get upset, because in my mind, through the trauma and the shock, was I caused other people to die, And so they finally knocked me out pretty quick, sedated me. I woke up 2 days later in launch school. When they woke me up, my body was bandaged and tubes and external fixtures on both arms. And I was happy to see I had both arms. It took me a while to remember, but I finally did. And the first thing I asked the nurse when they woke me up was, where's Greer? And I didn't put any thought into it. It wasn't being, altruistic or anything. I just, it was the last thing I saw. So I wanted to know the outcome. And she looked at me, and without missing the beat, she said, don't worry, you'll walk again. And when I do public speaking, and this is really the premise of my entire speech is, she told me what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it, even when that wasn't what I was asking. And I think that's something that I've kept with me ever since. Yeah.
It's on page 5 of the book. And I was the first, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, talking about your dad here, your upbringing. And then I got to that part and I was like, oh, like that's powerful. And the rest of the book is full of moments like that. So that was amazing. That nurse in Germany. Did you ever talk to her again or?
No, what's really cool is I've had several of them. We had a full medical contingent. We had what was called a mobile trauma unit, which is a big sterile box sealed up on the back of a big truck. And they can almost do surgery in this room. And so we brought it with us on this op because it was a pretty difficult op. And that was the first place I went. And I've actually reconnected with several of the corpsmen and one of the Navy doctors that was involved in that unit. Met one of them in Wyoming on an elk hunt. It was really cool. I was set up for that, actually. He knew and I didn't. And so I went to the Braves game with one of the corpsmen on Memorial Day. I met one just walking down the sidewalk at Walter Reed a year or two later. She just walked past me, started bawling because I never thought about it. They never find out. They work so hard to save somebody's life. They're alive when they leave their site, but they don't know if they're going to live. And so it was really cool. I spent some time reconnecting with several of them for a year or two. I never reconnected with her, but I look back and I think either she knows and that's enough, or she had so many of us come through. She may not need to, that may be something that she needs to keep that kind of chapter closed. But, and also the lack of identity for her allows her to be who she needs to be in my story for me. Does that make sense? And so, like, in my mind, she had a Southern accent. Highly doubtful, but that's where I'm from. So she called me Hunt. I know what was said, and I know what the impact was, but it's a movie in my head now. It's a memory, and I kind of like that.
Wow. And then how long was that recovery before you actually leave the Marine Corps? And then what was the path in the few minutes we have left? What was the path to Fox?
Yeah, I'll try to be as concise as possible. I'm long-winded, if you can't tell. So I got injured on August 6, 2010. And back then, Walter Reed and Bethesda were two different places. All the Marines and corpsmen went to Bethesda, and all the soldiers and airmen went to, all the Marines and sailors went to Bethesda, and soldiers and airmen went to Walter Reed. Well, the problem was all the rehab was at Walter Reed. So you had this ticker on you, this clock. When you got to Bethesda, you had to heal. And so recovery and rehabilitation, the recovery part is to heal and let your body heal, which was, for me, was surgery Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every week for weeks on end. They go in and open up the wounds, check everything. They're moving nerves a little at a time, so they'll grow back together. They're moving muscles a little at a time, so they'll reconnect to the ligament in the right way, because everything's so jumbled up. You tell your leg to go forward and it goes sideways. And so they're trying to get things reoriented that were traumatically ripped apart, so that you can use prosthetics. And so that once you get healed up, you move over to Walter Reed and you start learning to use prosthetics right away. They don't let you sit around. So I got injured in August 2010, and I started school in October 2010, using a mouthpiece. Like I was in one of those go-go gadget chairs, and I used a Dragon device to speak my notes and papers on campus at Walter Reed. And then I started walking in full-length prosthetics in February 2011. So that was about a 6-month process. And I was driving myself to Capitol Hill and working as an intern for the House Veterans Affairs Committee while I was active duty in July 2011. So it was an 11-month process thereabout, because it was right after July 4th. So almost exactly an 11-month process from blowing up in Afghanistan to being independent enough to take myself to work every day. I couldn't tell you the timeline in between that, a specific moment, but those are the markers that I remember. It took me till the end of 2012 to retire out of the Marine Corps. It takes a while when you're just injured for the VA and the Marine Corps to decide what your ratings are and stuff. And I didn't know I wanted to get out. I lobbied really hard to stay in the Marine Corps and stay in EOD Tech, and I actually got the Marine Corps to change its policy to where catastrophically injured guys could stay in the field. And then I realized in doing so, I liked policy and I liked how to get things changed. Worked on Capitol Hill and started advocating for things. And it wasn't big things. It was, hey, if we could just get left-handed, right-handed talk, this isn't a problem anymore. Those kinds of things. And little things that I knew I could get a win on. I mean, I didn't even have a college education yet. I was helping write legislation. And all Americans can. It's that simple if you get access. And that really spurred my passion in politics. It wasn't partisan based. It was policy, like outcome based. And I talk all the time, the difference between a task and an outcome. If you're focused on the task, you'll stop as soon as the task gets difficult or you hear no. But if you're focused on the outcome, you'll find a new way to get it done. If I tell you to go book me a flight because I need to be in San Antonio, if you're task oriented, you're going to stop when the plane leaves. But if you're goal oriented, you're going to throw me on a Greyhound bus and get me to San Antonio. And so that's how I tackled policy. What is the way we can make this happen? And that opened doors, being in DC, being outgoing, being willing to speak and share my thoughts and my story. Just you keep meeting people. I kept educating myself. I went to Georgetown and got my undergrad there. And then I went to the private nonprofit sector for almost 10 years before Fox picked me up. Yeah.
Really? It seems like you've been on Fox for a long time, because you're on a lot. And I always love when you come on, and my wife and I always watch you, and really appreciate your insights into everything. But how did you get connected with them? Because it seemed like all of a sudden one day, like there you are and you're a pro already.
Well, that's what's funny. I went during I was going on as early as 2013, like on the 2 p.m. hour, but nobody's watching. And so I was able to kind of really develop my skill set over time. This is the kind of job like reading a teleprompter. I know people go to school for it. I didn't. So I either had to like, it's a fake it till you make it thing, you know, like you do it, it's how you learn it, or you don't get to. And I love that stress of, hey, if I don't get this right, I don't get to do it again. It went back to those IED days, and I didn't realize it, but it's what it was. It was feeding that part of my personality that I had cultured and conditioned. And so what happened is I was serving nonprofits that were serving my buddies, and that helped me by being a keynote speaker or being an ambassador or helping even with their operations sometimes. One of them had a gala in DC every year. And through that nonprofit, I met a producer at Fox. About a year later, she asked me to come on her show and talk about Kyle Carpenter, because the position that I had on Capitol Hill didn't exist before me. I snuck into it, lied my way into it, honestly. Once the Marine Corps found out I was working on Capitol Hill, they couldn't make me leave because everybody already knew. They're like, that no-legged guy up in the House Veterans Affairs Committee is fun to talk to. So we formalized the program and brought Kyle Carpenter in after me. And he was about to be awarded the Medal of Honor. This is in 2013, I believe. So this is hilarious. So she asked me, hey, would you mind to come on television and talk about Kyle? I know you recovered with him. And I'm like, yeah, of course. This was Gretchen Carlson's show called The Real Story. And so I go on and get mic'd up. I wear a seersucker suit and a bow tie. That shows you how much I know about India, right? Like the worst thing you could wear on TV because those lines vibrate. And that's all I had. I went and bought it at like, belts that day. And I get mic'd up. I'm thinking, what the hell? I'll never do this again. No big deal. And I know Kyle. I know my story. Well, I'd worked at DITRA for a little while and at the Pentagon before I found my internship on Capitol Hill. So I had friends around. And President Obama breaks into the show before they get to me. And the essence of what he had to say was, hey, these guys, ISIS that I called JV last month? Well, I'm going to send some guys over there to kill them. So he's eating a little bit of crow. And they're like, hey, we need you to respond to President Obama. We'll do the Carpenter story next. So I text some friends. I get some information. I go off my instinct of what I experienced in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when President Obama goes away, Fox introduces me as a Afghan Iraq veteran, and I give my response. And that started the cascade of producers saw it for other shows. And then getting in Twitter early as well was helpful.
Wow. Yeah. And it is stressful. I mean, I do a couple of them live, but most all of them have been video. And what I didn't realize is that a lot of times you're not looking at the host. You're looking into, if you're remote, you're looking into like a black box, and there's one person on that camera, but it's just a black box, and you hear it in your ear, and then all of a sudden you're on, but there's no body language like we're doing now. Like you can't, you can't tell if they want you to hurry up or slow down. There's none of those.
Yeah.
And if it's silent for a while, you're kind of like, should I wrap this up? Should I keep going? There's no cues at all. So it's very uncomfortable, but it's still uncomfortable for me. But I can see how it would give you some of those same feelings as jumping out of a plane or doing whatever else, because you're in the moment and you're not thinking about anything else while you're on, because you know that, hey, this is your job and there's all these people watching, but here you are right now and it's live. And if you mess up, guess what? There's no going back. Like in this podcast.
That's right.
Hey, you know what I said at the beginning about that thing? What I really meant to say was this. There's none of that, obviously, in your 2 minutes and 30 seconds on one of those shows, especially, prime time, when you're like, oh, geez. Or they ask you the question that you weren't supposed to be on there about, and you're like scrambling.
That happens.
Yeah, because you haven't prepared at all. And then all of a sudden you're live and they ask you a question that you didn't prep for, or they don't really know that much about, maybe. And sometimes those are even better because it's like natural, but it can be very stressful. So I know you got to go to the airport, but you were on, I think, live standby most of the time during the withdrawal. So you're watching that and reacting to it, real time with your feelings and emotions, with your experience there. What was that like to kind of go through that live in front of everybody? And what are your thoughts on the withdrawal now in the time we have left?
To answer the question, like to go back to what our previous comment, they kind of dovetail together. I never worry about people thinking Joey Jones is an idiot. I worry about the people I represent. There are only so many Marines on television talking about these issues. There are only so many Afghan veterans on TV talking about these issues. There are only so many guys that talk like me that represent this region of the country that was born and raised in a trailer that represents, I don't want to say poor, but lower income folks that make it. And I always take that responsibility as a million pounds. Like I want them to feel represented and heard, and their questions asked and their comments made as well through me. And so when Afghanistan happened, well, now, that's narrowing it down to that. These are Afghanistan veterans. And I'm not trying to speak for them, but for a lot of people, it sounds like I am. And so I'll be completely honest with you. There was such a duality in my own mind and soul during that time. Part of me doesn't trust anything about war at this point. I don't trust those that make the decisions. I don't have a tinfoil hat, but I can step back and see that Bell Helicopter made a hell of a lot of money for Johnson, and we act like that didn't happen. So there's some self-interest that is either there on purpose or not that makes me worry about the decisions made. And so I look at the Afghanistan war and I say, we need to end this now. We need to be out of there. Our guys are still dying. Why? And Trump comes along and he makes that decision, and you want to celebrate it. And then you have someone like Mattis that you really respect and felt like really did the right thing for the right reasons, and he disagrees. Well, then you have someone say, well, that general's never won a war. You're like, oh, wow, you're right. Good intentions be damned. Maybe he doesn't make the right decisions here. Maybe Trump's onto something. And you start to try to figure out what's the truth. Like, I want to advocate for killing every one of those SOBs that killed the 13 at the Abbey Gate. I want to advocate for killing every one of those guys that I saw. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. The 2 worst days of my life involved kids that had no clue what war was going on or didn't need to. And they're responsible for those deaths. And I want justice, and I want revenge, and I want that type of mentality and that ideological warfare to get off of this earth forever. It's not up to me. It's not even up to this country. So there's a big part of me that wants to see bad people killed, right? That's part of being a warrior. I want to defend my people. And then there's this other part of me that's now 37 years old. It's got 2 kids, that's involved in politics, that has a mortgage, that understands that, we're not the center of the universe, and that we need to keep sending our young to die in a war that we're not trying to win to begin with. So I'm sitting here already in this position, and now Biden comes in and he withdraws everyone the way he did. And my visceral reaction is, how dare he? How dare he surrender my war? That's my war. It's not his war. He didn't fight that war. That's my war. I left flesh in that war. How dare he get to surrender my war? And I think that was the general consensus among my most liberal veteran friends of like, what in the world? This is how we're going to end this. But then you have to give that opportunity time to breathe and say, could we do this the right way? What is the right way? Could we do this without bloodshed? Individually on decisions, there's a million things that bothered me about how it was done. I think Biden's calculation was, no matter how messy it gets, it's before even the midterms. And by the time re-election comes around, he'll be known as the president that ended the Afghan war, which was a tenet for him through his entire vice presidency. So it's true to character. It's what he truly believes. But that calculus just jumps over the idea that it wrecked the mentality of so many warfighters. It wrecked the lives of not just 13 that were killed that we talk about, but the few dozen that lost legs and had traumatic brain injury. I had a buddy that was there that day that was an EOD tech and had seen the worst of what IEDs had to offer. And he's gotten out and started a nonprofit to help the psyche of the service members that experienced what happened around that airport. Babies being thrown over the wall, friends getting blown up. It shook his world. It changed him forever. And we sit at home, and because we had 2 decades of being numb to war, it's just a headline, or it feels that way. Well, I get to be one of the guys that takes it beyond that. I get to make it personal. I get to explain to you why it matters. Not because I want you to dislike Biden and his decisions. If that's Trump, if it's Biden, whoever it is, this is why these decisions and these series of events should stick with us and stick out forever, even beyond the day I got injured. And so it was a roller coaster. It really was a roller coaster. And I tried to be consistent. That's the one thing you have to be. You got to be malleable and humble enough to come in the next day and say, you know what? Here's what I learned in my sleep overnight. This is what I think about it today. Then I think our audience was really great about following me. And I think a lot of them were experiencing the same emotions.
Man, incredible. Well, I know I have to let you go. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I have so many questions for you, but we'll do this. We'll link up again, I'm sure, at some point. And thank you for your time in uniform, everything you sacrificed for this country and for what you're doing today. It's sincerely appreciated. So thank you. And when does the new book come out? What's is it done, or are you working on it?
No, it's a 2025 project. This is the first time I've talked about it publicly. We just inked the deal this week, and we're going to do a similar approach focused on first responders, warriors here at home, from the border to the small communities, riding ambulances, people that carry the psychological wounds of taking care of our society. Both of my brothers-in-law are 30-year firemen, and I think it's a story that needs to be told.
Awesome. Well, here's this one. Highly recommend it to everybody. Unbroken Bonds of Battle, and man, emotional, like I said. So thank you for sharing these stories. Everyone needs to read this, to remember. And where do people find you? You're on Instagram, you're on Twitter. Where's the best place for people to follow along? You're on the news every night. What's the best place for people to follow along? Yeah.
Check in Fox News channel. I'm a fill-in host there. If you want to link with me specifically, it's Johnny, JOHNNY _Joey, JOEY on Twitter and Instagram. I'm firmly a millennial, so I'm not that active on Facebook. So there you go.
Got it. I completely understand. Awesome, man. Well, hey, get to the airport, and thanks for everything, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Hey, thank you for everything. You're an inspiration, and you're doing our community a service with your art, and we appreciate you for it.
Thanks, brother. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast. For more on Johnny Joey Jones, be sure and pick up his book, Unbroken Bonds of Battle. Follow him on Instagram and Twitter at Johnny, that's JOHNNY _Joey, JOEY. You can follow me on the social channels at Jack Carr USA. Officialjackcarr.com is the website. Click on shop in the upper right-hand corner for the merch. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. Keep fighting. Think you know James Reese? Think again. Red Sky Morning is available on May 14th in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Everywhere books are sold. Will there be blood? Count on it.